So this is what we're here for. This is 01 right the way through to that latest release of the Prestige Le Sol from Craggy Range. And this is the guy who's responsible for all of this. What was the idea behind coming up here, Steve?
Well, exotic wine, exotic location, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good synergy, yeah? Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
With the big carver bowl right next to
Yeah, no carver in at the moment, just a little bit of ice here to keep the wines, the reds at the good temperature. So, yep. So, but no, fantastic location, eh?
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, for those of you around there.
Yeah.
So can I talk to you a bit about these wines before?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yep. I just need to get them open first.
Okay, yep. I was just going to talk about kind of seasons in these.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yep.
So starting with the 01.
First vintage, pretty cool, light cropping year in Hawke's Bay, quite a lot of frost around, so that it was quite late, but this was the year that defined the style, because when we decided to split those two parts of the vineyard on picking date, and it was Doug Wise's decision to leave it till late, and that's what came from Le Sol. So
okay.
Yeah, and that pretty stunning first vintage to start with.
Yeah. So the vines were a few years old, and you recognised.
They're only 3 years old.
But you'd already by that time recognised that was the.
Well, what we didn't know is, because it was our first vintage of Syrah, we didn't know from a picking point of view what were the right criteria for picking Syrah. I was pretty comfortable with all the Bordeaux Red decision making.
Yeah.
So when we were walking through the vineyard, the thing was, I felt these grapes were ready.
Yep.
And Doug said, no, I don't think they are for Syrah in California and other parts that I've seen. I think we should leave it later. So we picked the vineyard in half. Half of it became Block 14.
Okay, yep.
The other half, which is this part, was picked 3 weeks later when we had a little bit of dimpling on the berries, and went from there. So it was big change in the way that the berries looked. And that philosophy stayed all the way through. So Le Sol is always the lightest cropping, stoniest parts of the vineyard and latest harvested.
And then 02?
Warmer year, really good year in Hawke's Bay, quite an extracted year, so quite a big year.
Right, okay, yeah.
Probably we sort of describe the 02 vintage as maybe Le Sol extreme, because we were able to sort of leave it on the vine really late, and we sort of wanted to, when you're starting to make these wines, you need to push the boundaries and see where you're going to go.
Yeah.
And that is certainly what happened in 2002.
Then nothing in 03?
Nothing in 03. That was a vintage that totally destroyed the vintage, the year with frost. It was a frost that wiped out the entire Gimlet Gravels vineyard. So
okay.
There was only one part of it, funnily, a little Merlot and Cabernet Franc. We made Sophia, but no Le Sol.
Okay.
Yep.
And then went straight on to 04.
04, sort of symbolic vintage for us, because it was the last vintage that Doug Weiser made. That was the following year. He unfortunately got killed in that kite surfing accident, but a cool year, again a later ripening year. Quite similar in a way to 2001. The wines are probably just a little bit more denser than 2001, a little bit more savoury, into that peppery, lavendery sort of characteristics.
Then 05.
05, lush, warm, rich, ripe. It was starting to, as the vines are starting to get a bit of maturity here, into the licoricey, tarry sort of notes, I think. But a lovely, warm vintage. And it's sort of produced, all of the wines seem to be these sort of lush, rich versions of the wines.
And 06.
06, lightest cropping, lightest production year for us. Very, very tricky Syrah vintage. We only made 120 cases. This sort of came from walking through the vineyard, picking the odd bunch that had done exactly what we wanted it to do. So, and it's the only vintage that we have that's got the Chave clone of Syrah in it. All the other vintages have been just the heritage clone.
07.
07, probably the Rockstar wine.
Yeah. As kind of season goes.
Cool, very similar to 2004.
Right, okay.
So when we're looking at these wines, it's going to be really interesting to see evolution, because from a winemaking point of view, there's not much change in winemaking at all through here. Philosophically, a little bit less of new oak, and a little bit more control from a winemaking point of view, but in terms of technique and philosophy, not really changed.
So you trim back the oak from the start?
Yep, so we're probably sitting at about, I need to look at the notes, but probably 70% new in 2001, and we're sitting at 45 to 55% by the time we got to 2008. So
quite a drop.
Yeah, and as the vines get older, you tend to get more good fruit tannins, good seed tannins, so you don't need as much new oak, and you just let more of the expression of the vineyard show.
Yep, and then finally the 08.
08
Which-
warm vintage, similar in a little bit to 2005. So not super hot vintage, but lots of growing degree days. So the wines are very graceful, lovely richness to them, and lovely ripeness. Quite different from 07 really. So.
Which Le Sol vintage do you think really defines Le Sol as one of the premier Syrahs coming out of Hawke's Bay?
The first vintage is always going to be pretty, because that was the first of that style made in Hawke's Bay. So
Okay,
that sort of put the benchmark. This is the style. This is what we're going to do. From that point onwards, I'd have to say 07.
07.
Yeah.
Okay, I
absolutely.
think that's the general consensus amongst Hawke's Bay
Yeah.
wineries.
Yeah, and it's a pretty tricky variety to grow. So you learn as you go through these vintages. So it was nice to sort of absolutely get it. I felt we got it right in the vineyard in 2007.
Yeah.
And that sort of lets everything flow through to the wine.
So you'd like to be able to replicate 07 and make that the standard kind of style?
I don't think you can have a standard
Okay.
style, because you've got the vintage sort of variation thing. I think that's a benchmark that we'll always look up to, I think. And there might be some of the vintage that sort of get a little bit lost because 07 was so great.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing with Syrah, is that you get quite a lot of vintage expression, and I think it's I think there'll be a lot of vintages around it that over time, and when these wines are older, show as well as the 07 has.
So how long do you think that you can keep these wines, sell these wines? I know it's going to vary.
This is going to be. I haven't looked
Yeah.
at the 01 for probably 2 years.
Okay.
So the next day or so is going to be interesting. We'll look at them today in this exotic location. We'll look at them a bit more seriously tomorrow.
Yep.
Once the bottles have been open for a little bit.
So this is a first.
Yeah, we've never done it in the winery either.
Okay.
Yep. So.
Good.
Yeah, all the guys back at the winery are really happy with me at the moment.
I can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. They're working, and I'm sitting here tasting Le Sol in this great location.
Right. Okay. We'll taste them a bit later on.
Perfect.